Welcome to the CPD programme for dental professionals. Before we start today's CPD session, please ensure that you have downloaded all your course materials from your online folder. This will include your course notes, your CPD questions, your professional development plan form, and your PowerPoint and evaluation. At the end of the session, you will need to complete the questions and the evaluation. These completed forms should be then uploaded to your online folder, and then you will receive your certificate of CPD. Managing consent. This covers GDC Standard 3.
The big case that brought everything to everyone's attention was the Alder Hay case. This was a case where people were asking bereaved parents if they could. They were asking bereaved parents if they could take body parts for transplantation or for scientific research, and parents were agreeing. What they were actually taking was almost everything of that child, storing it, and when it's been in storage for so long it was no longer any use to research with, they were disposing of it by incineration. And when parents found out about that, they were really not particularly happy. Take it forward to the next. And as a result of all the pressure that came to bear there, the Redfern report was issued. So the organs were harvested between 88 and 95, and in January 2004 a report was published and said that 2,000 families as a result of this filed lawsuits against the NHS. The NHS then settled out of court with most of them and to the cost of £5 million, which really makes them think now, okay, so what did we do that we shouldn't have done and how do we do it differently? And basically it's about informed consent. It's about asking for consent to what you're literally going to do. So if they just said to people, can we take organs, can we store them in a lab until they're no use for anything and incinerate them, people would probably have said, no, you can't, let my child be buried whole. But that was what was happening. So actually getting consent has to really and truly match what's going to happen. Now in dentistry that's not likely. Now the standards taken directly from the handbook here are here on board. Patients must understand the decisions that they're being asked to make. How do we make sure that patients understand their decisions? This is what we need to put our minds to, because ultimately that's what's required. Patients must give informed consent for each stage of investigation and treatment. So it's not just a case of consenting when they arrive on the practice premises, it must be for each part of the treatment. So if they're going to the hygienist, there must be consent. If they go to a specialist, to the general dentist, all of these times along the pathway of the patient's journey, there needs to be consent at each stage. And that may be as much as you saying to them, right, hello, welcome, I'm the hygienist, I'm going to do your scale and polish. And then there's the names thing, as you were saying, my name is. Now, you don't have to say that every time, because patients aren't stupid, If they've been coming to you for 20 years, you're not going to say, hello, my name is Jan.
We don't have to have things signed, to see the hygienist, they don't have to sign a consent though, do they?
No, as long as the hygienist that's treating them is convinced that the patient is fully aware that that's what is happening to them.
If they book in for a hygiene appointment,
so in terms of communication with patients, the standards ask that we follow robust and well communicated policies and procedures. Now the consent policy and procedure is in place here in this practice. Do each of you know how to access that? Yeah? And is it easily accessible to you? Would you have to go and get it from somewhere, or could you just put it up on your computer? How would you, if you were looking at the consent policy for this practice right now, what would you do to get it?
In reception, isn't it?
Consent to charges, of course, is another one. People really have to have agreed to pay the cost of the treatment. Can be a little bit difficult with ad hoc treatments, but nevertheless, even though you're not going through the whole writing them a letter and giving them time to think about it process, you still have to make sure that they know that what you're doing on that day is going to have a cost attached to it and what that cost will be. So fees and payment options must be set out. So this is going to cost and you need to pay it today, sort of. Sorry?
Do you think we should reiterate the cost issue once the patient has received the letter, has booked in for the treatment, so he's fully or she is fully aware of what she's going through? Because it's quite embarrassing to go through all that.
Changes need to be treated with a new estimate. So again, the whole thing needs to go back to the patient to be signed when things change after the consent. And it all needs to be documented. So again, patient's records just need to have a very clear note to say patient has confirmed that they've received the letter and they are aware of the cost of the payment options.
We usually do a signed copy as well and then scan that into the...
Okay, so consent to charge is very important. Withdrawal of consent. Now, the fact is patients can withdraw their consent at any time. That can be very inconvenient. Sometimes their withdrawal of consent is simply failing appointments and not coming back for the treatment. But there are other ways that can withdraw consent, aren't there? They could withdraw on the day that they've come in and they're going ahead and then they sit in the chair and they say, no, I can't do this. Have you had that happen? Yeah. You know, and the patient has every right to do that. I've certainly, over the years, I've worked with dentists, seen some dentists that have said, oh, you're being stupid, so sit down and they will be responsible for any consequences as a result of doing that. So they can't hold you responsible if at some point in the future something happens that they're not expecting, or something that's been explained may happen if they've withdrawn consent. And the other thing that's absolutely essential with this is that the notes that you take are taken at the time. Don't try and make the notes at a later date. These are really important notes that really could come to the point of being something that's referred to. So make sure that they're made as close to the time as is humanly possible. These days with computers, it's really quite possible to tell exactly when a note was made on a computer. So making sure that you make the notes before you move on to the next patient when you've had this sort of a situation with the patient is a very important step. The standards, again, are very clear about whose responsibility these things are, and they tell us, therefore, that it is the clinician's responsibility. Now, the clinician works in a team with their nurse, but ultimately, whether it's the nurse making the record and making the explanations or what they're doing, or the dentist, it is the dentist's responsibility. And it's absolutely fine if the dentist is completely comfortable that the nurse is going to do exactly what they want, that's fine. But they don't transfer the responsibility. Okay, so to explain all the relevant options, to check that consent, this isn't for withdrawal, this is always, to check that consents, even if another member of the team has already seen the patient. So when you're going from hygienist to dentist to somebody else within the practice, because somebody else, it's a strong dry because somebody else in the practice has seen them, don't assume that your consent is in place. Check your consent. Okay, and the nurse can do that and just give you the tick that you. There'd have been even different looks if you'd have come out without doing that, wouldn't it? Check that the written consent is on file. The fact that they've been to somebody else, if somebody else hasn't checked it and you're sort of compounding it, always check that the consent is on file before the treatment starts, and document consent discussions with patients. So anything that you've had a conversation and the patient said yes, go ahead, it does need to be done. The nurse can do that again, but ultimately the clinician needs to make sure it's done. Ad hoc, it says robust explicit consent, preferably in writing. That is preferably, so it does therefore mean that if it's not in writing but it's absolutely clear that the patient has said without a single doubt, please get me out of pain, do it now. And you say, well, that means I need to do ABC, and they say, yes, just do it, that's fine. That's robust consent. Two-way conversations, treatment options, risks and potential benefits. This is a conversation that needs to be had with a patient. It doesn't have to be verbal, it can be in writing. So these are the points that need to be in any information the patient gets. Why the treatment's necessary, associated consequences, risks and benefits of the treatment, and the likely prognosis. Now, you haven't got a crystal ball, but you can give people some indication of what you consider to be the most likely long-term outcomes. You need to make it clear to the patient what you recommend. There are several options, however, my recommendation is, and they need to know that very clearly. And that may be something that you can put into a consent letter so it's absolutely clear. Option 1, option 2, option 3. One of those options is the one that you're the most strongly recommended to consider. Costs. What might happen if they don't have the treatment, and any guarantees, how long it's guaranteed for. And again, that's a bit of a dodgy ground to go on, isn't it? Saying this is guaranteed to last you for, but then they go out and they open the milk bottle, the beer bottle with their teeth or something. So you know, there needs to be some riders with that. Okay, so good practice that the team should take part in annual audit refresher training for this sort of consent thing, to have a look to see if the policy that you have on consent within the practice is widely understood and it's being used. Now, those are the standards. Let's look at what you put on the sheets that have gone round there.